Chapter 26. I'm sorry, Patriel Lacuni, Lockfro said, giving the woman a helpless shrug. I really don't know anything more about Haplif or the other Ogbui than I've already told your investigators. Yes, I understand that's your position, Lacuni said, her eyes boring into Lockfro's like she was trying to see into the back of his brain. All I'm asking is that you rethink everything, that you rethink it very, very hard. Lockfro forced himself to meet that gaze, some anger starting to mix into his frustration and nervousness. That was his position? What was that supposed to mean? I've already told you everything, he said. If you want more, you'll have to ask Counselor Lakuviv or Senior Aide Lakchip. Thank you, the Patriel said, her voice going even colder than it had already been. Whatever dislike she had toward Lockfro, she was carrying a triple dose of it toward the others. Be assured that the former counselor, she leaned heavily on the word, and his aide are being questioned even more thoroughly than you are. Did they mention the Ogbui had a Koduyo Mitiger and a Pathfinder with them? Lockfro offered. I never met them, but I heard a couple of people talking. The Pathfinder disappeared with the alien ship, Lacuni said. The Mitiger will be interviewed elsewhere at a future date. Right, Lockfro muttered, but not yet, and probably not as intensely as Lockfro and his family had been. The Sodlak and Koduyo were allies, and both were allies of the Arizi. Word had probably come down from above to go easy on the kid. Allies got special treatment. Normal everyday citizens, the ones who would never be part of the family's upper echelons, not so much. Can I go now? He asked. I have a ranch to run. Lacuni pursed her lips. For the moment, she said reluctantly, but keep yourself available in case we need to talk to you again. I'm running a ranch, he growled, standing up. Where would I go? The Ascendancy is a big place, Lacuni countered. One last thing. Your daughter mentioned that a piece of jewelry the Ogbui had given her had been lost. Was it ever found? No, Lockfro said without hesitation. After all, he'd lied about it so often to Lacris that the words now came out without any effort at all. This time, at least, unlike the times he said that to his wife and daughter, there was no accompanying flicker of guilt. Too bad, Lacuni said, her eyes again boring into his. You'll let us know if it is. Of course, Lockfro said. You'll be the first. I'm sorry, Supreme General, Mid-Captain Samacro said. There's really nothing more I can tell you. I understand, Bakif said, glowering across his desk at the man. Not surprisingly, every one of Thrawn's officers had offered the same story. The Springhawk was attacked, it was partially disabled and briefly boarded, and the timely arrival of the Grey Shrike and the Sodlak, Aragal, and Pomrio family warships had been the only thing that saved it from destruction. The boarders had subsequently been found dead in the Springhawk's brig, victims of small doomsday devices planted inside their bodies by their unknown employer. The Grey Shrike's commander, Mid-Captain Apros, had been lionized by all three families for his actions. Apros, in turn, had thanked the families publicly and enthusiastically for their timely arrival at the scene, in time to pluck the Springhawk from disaster. The families had accepted the gratitude with grace and had reminded everyone that they were Chiss first and Sodlak, Aragal, or Pomrio second. At that point, as far as everyone was concerned, the incident was over. Somehow, no one got around to explaining what they were all doing that far out of Ascendancy territory in the first place. The worst part was that Bakif would probably never be able to get the complete truth. Ever since the deployment of Skywalkers aboard Ascendancy ships and the veil of secrecy wrapped around them, there had been a curious but necessary dichotomy in law and regulations. Bridge officers who knew about the Skywalkers were forbidden to speak about anything the girls were involved with, not even to others who shared the secret. The rest of the officers and warriors aboard were expected to obey all orders, to accept whatever happened without question, and generally to do their jobs and mind their own business. For whatever reason, Thrawn had brought his Skywalker into the events over that distant and unremarkable planet. The result was that only Thrawn was free to give Bakif the truth about those events. Under normal circumstances, Bakif would have hauled the other into his office to demand exactly that. But in yet one more bizarre twist to this story, all three of the affected families, along with their assorted allies in the Syndicure, seemed to be actively blocking any inquiry by the fleet in general and Bakif in particular. Their own accounts of the abortive attack on their family warships and an escaping enemy freighter that tried too late to turn out of the path of a pair of fleeing gunboats had matched perfectly with the statements from the Springhawk's officers. The Syndicure had declared the matter closed and clearly intended it to remain so. Allies of the Arizi, Dasklo, and Plick all doing their damnedest to keep a Myth senior captain from testifying before the fleet and likely getting in trouble. A Myth officer, moreover, that many of them disliked to the point of hatred. Paradox atop riddle atop mystery. "Would it help if I promised anything you say would be treated as confidential?" Bakif asked, trying one last time. "I'm sorry, Supreme General," Samacro said evenly. "There are standing orders I have no choice but to obey. You'll have to ask Senior Captain Thrawn." Bakif eyed him. There'd been something in his tone. "You don't like Thrawn, do you, Mid-Captain?" Samacro hesitated. "Permission to speak honestly, sir?" "Certainly." "No, sir, I don't," Samacro said. "I don't think he understands how anything outside the fleet works, and I don't think he's very good at inspiring his officers and warriors. He pushes things to the edge, takes liberties with orders, and generally acts in a manner that previous generations of fleet officers would find disgraceful." He seemed to brace himself. "But that doesn't really matter. He's an excellent commander, and he knows how to handle his ship. Even his most outrageous hunches are generally proved correct, and he always brings us through whatever storms we find ourselves in. Always." "You sound like a good first officer," Bakif commented. "Which is also the point, sir," Samacro said. "I'm the Springhawk's first officer. Senior Captain Thrawn is the Springhawk's commander. Whatever I might personally think of him is completely irrelevant. I'm an officer of the fleet, he's my commander, and I will follow him and obey his orders to the best of my ability. Period." Bakif inclined his head. "As I said, Mid-Captain, a good first officer." He waved toward the door. "You're dismissed. Thank you for your time." For a few moments after Samacro left, Bakif gazed thoughtfully at the closed door. Yes, he would certainly ask Thrawn about it, but not yet. Not until things had quieted down, or there was a new threat or internal scandal to distract the Syndicure's attention. For the moment, it was more vital that they gather further information on these Agbui cultural nomads who seemed to be somehow at the center of everything. The Council needed to know who they were, where they came from, who neither would the Syndicure. Bakif didn't especially care. It could have gone better, Samacro realized soberly as he made his way from Bakif's office toward the main shuttle landing area. But it could also have gone much, much worse. His claim of silence based on Cherry's presence on the Springhawk's bridge was pure fantasy, of course. It adhered to the strict form of that regulation, certainly, but it was light years out of the Creator's intent. If Bakif had chosen to demand an answer, and Samacro had continued to refuse, he would be on his way to a small detention cell right now. But he'd been pretty sure Bakif wouldn't press the issue. Right now, the Syndicure was in self-defense mode, determined to sweep whatever had happened out the door, and the Council was just as clearly not interested in sweeping any of it back in. Maybe later, after the families moved on to other matters, but not now. What was bothering him more was that, as far as he could tell, there hadn't been a peep out of anyone regarding the nonsense story he'd given Thalia's. And there should have been. The soap bubble he'd spun to her about Sunrise being the last stand fortress for the Nicardan remnant should have been screamed from the assembly cupola by now. There should have been outrage and scorn and syndics calling for Thrawn's head in a bucket for ever entertaining such a ridiculous notion. Instead, there was nothing. Did that mean that Thalias wasn't a spy, after all? Samacro scowled. Of course not. All it meant was that she or her controller had decided to sit on the story, waiting for a better opportunity to hang it around Thrawn's neck. But that time would come, and when it did, Thalias would finally be unmasked. And she would very much regret it, because her betrayal wouldn't just be an attack on Thrawn. It would be an attack on the entire expansionary defense fleet, on all the officers and warriors who risked their lives daily to protect the people of the Chiss Ascendancy. That was something that simply could not be allowed to happen. So let them wait. Let them plot and scheme. Let them choose the time and the place. Whenever it was, wherever it was, Samakra would be waiting. When the assignment Kalori was handed identified his job as guiding an unnamed person in an unflagged ship, he was pretty sure what was going to happen somewhere along the way. He was right. "I'm sorry I can't deliver a better report," he apologized when he finally ran out of words. "Calm yourself, Pathfinder," Jixtus said, his gloved fingers tapping gently on the edge of his contour chair. "I never expected this to mark the end of the Chiss Ascendancy. They're more resilient than that." He paused, and Chilori had the sense of an evil smile behind the black veil, though perhaps not nearly as resilient as they think. Jixtus paused, the robed shoulders giving a little shrug. "You were right to be concerned about this Chiss officer, though. I'll be sure to add Senior Captain Thrawn into our calculations in the future." "I would definitely recommend that," Chilori said, his cheek winglets twitching. "I wish I could offer some hints on how to defeat him." "Defeat isn't always necessary," Jixtus said. "Isolation and neutralization can be equally effective. My more immediate concern is the fact that you left Haplif's body behind for the Chiss to examine." "That wasn't my decision," Chilori said hastily, feeling his winglets starting to flutter. "Shimkif saw that the Zodlak rancher had killed him and ordered the pilot to get clear." "Again, Pathfinder, calm yourself," Jixtus said, more severely this time. "The Grisks lay blame only where it's deserved, and only on those who fail us. Each of our servants is responsible solely for his own decisions and actions, not for another's." "Yes, sir," Chilori said, feeling his winglets and his tension subsiding. Grisks. He'd never heard of a species by that name, or a faction, if that's what they were, or a combine, or a gang, or something else entirely. A name by itself really didn't contain much information. But at least now he had a name to put to the manipulators behind all this. "Is it over?" he asked. "I mean, are you going to need me for anything else?" "Really, Pathfinder, you surprise me," Jixtus said. "Have you forgotten your other mandate?" Chilori frowned. "Sir?" "I told you to learn for me how exactly the Chiss navigate through the chaos," Jixtus reminded him. "That is what I need you for, and that is the task you will accomplish." "Yes, sir," Chilori said. The weight on his heart, which had been starting to lift, now came crashing back down. "I'll do my best." "Yes, you will," Jixtus agreed calmly, "because as I said, we lay blame on those who fail us." "I'm told, Senior Captain Lakinda," Syndic Zistalmu said, his voice studiously casual, "that your family is unhappy with you." "I've heard similar reports, Syndic Zistalmu," Lakinda said, long practice allowing her to keep her face and voice expressionless. "You'll understand that I can't comment on such things." "Of course," Zistalmu said. "I understand." Lakinda nodded. She would just bet he did. The Sodlak weren't just unhappy with her. They were furious. The Patriarch himself had sent a message castigating her for failing to secure the Neox mine for them. That, despite the fact that the Selwys Patriol's own internal investigation had surely by now uncovered evidence that the whole thing had been a fraud from the beginning. Lakinda herself would probably never know the final results of any such inquiry. The fog of secrecy that had been spread over this thing was both awesome and more than a little frightening. Under the circumstances, she probably didn't want to know what was going on right now between the Sodlak and their allies. Only she might not have a choice about that. The Arizi were one of the Sodlak's strongest allies, and her presence today in Syndic Zistalmu's office might well be part of the fallout from those backroom deals and maneuverings. If he demanded she tell him everything she knew, could she refuse him? There were limitations on such things in the fleet, but she'd been on a family mission and under family auspices. Did fleet rules even apply? "Naturally, I commend both your loyalty and your discretion," Zistalmu continued. He picked up his questas and gestured to it. "I'm also quite impressed by your list of recent successes," he continued. "Your campaigns with Admiral Aralani's task force have been most impressive." "Thank you, sir," Lakinda said. "I'll remind you that much of the credit for those victories goes to the Admiral and her capable leadership." "Again, loyalty and discretion," Zistalmu said, inclining his head to her. "We of the Arizi value both qualities. You're what, a Zodlak merit adoptive?" "Yes," Lakinda said, a sour taste in her mouth. The first officer on the Midsummer, trying to stare her down because he was blood and she wasn't. though that gulf might soon evaporate, and not in a good way. Along with the anger and frustration radiating from the Patriarch's office had come calls for Lakinda to be detached from the family entirely. At the moment, those calls weren't loud, but it seemed to her that they were slowly growing in both number and volume. What would happen to her if it came to that? Would she be rematched to her old family, back in the obscure Oyokal farming community that she'd escaped from when she joined the fleet? More worrying, if she was no longer Sodlak, what would be the Defense Hierarchy Council's response? Theoretically, she would still keep her rank, but would they decide she could no longer be an effective ship's commander? Though family status doesn't matter in the fleet, she added, as much to herself as to Zistalmu. Of course not, Zistalmu agreed, nor should it. On the other hand, it never hurts to have a strong family position, whether to leverage for future endeavors or just as a bit of cushioning against the general surprises of life. He raised his eyebrows. Tell me, Senior Captain, how would you like to move up from merit adoptive to full trial-born? Lakinda felt her eyes widen. She'd assumed Zistalmu's purpose in calling her in was to either coax out some additional details of the Neox fiasco or else simply to offer moral support for her family problems. Suggesting he was willing to push through an advancement was the last thing she could have expected. Can you do that? She asked. I need the Patriarch's approval to even start the trials, and as you just said, the whole family is unhappy with me. Zistalmu chuckled. Oh, I doubt even our Patriarch could convince yours to change his mind on anything, he conceded. The Sodlak have been good allies, but your current Patriarch is a stiff-necked old ground lion. No, Senior Captain, you misunderstand. I'm not encouraging you to take the Sodlak family trials. I'm offering you the chance to become a trial-born of the Arizi. Oh, Lakinda managed. All right. So Zistalmu offering to nudge the Sodlak on her behalf was the second-to-last thing she could have expected. I don't know what to say. You don't need to answer right now, Zistalmu said. In fact, I'd be a little concerned if you didn't take some time to think about the offer. But be assured that it's genuine, it's eagerly and wholeheartedly given, and it's completely open-ended. Take all the time you need, and contact me when you've made a decision. I will, Lakinda said. Understand in turn that whether or not I accept, I'm flattered and humbled by the offer. We wouldn't make it if we didn't feel you deserved it, Zistalmu said. At any rate, I'm sure you have other matters that require your attention, so I'll say farewell for now. Thank you, Syndic, Lakinda said, standing up. I'll make a decision as quickly as I can. At your own pace, Senior Captain, Zistalmu said. Good day. A moment later, Lakinda was striding down the corridor, her head spinning. Trial-born of the Arizi. Not in the farthest reaches of her imagination would such a possibility ever have occurred to her. Yes, she would consider it. She would consider it very seriously. As an old man back home had once jokingly told her as he picked himself up off the ground, when you see the saddle bull is about to throw you, jump off. And really, Senior Captain Zienda had a nice and rather exotic ring to it. The call came late at night. As Thurfian thought to himself, all such calls should come. He passed early this morning, Speaker Theklo told him, her voice tired and strained, peacefully and with his family in attendance. I know that was the way he would have wanted to go. As would we all, Thurfian said. I'm sorry to hear that he's gone. They were the standard words spoken at such news, Thurfian knew. But unlike some who would be repeating that sentiment in the coming days, he genuinely meant it. He and Patriarch Thraki had had their clashes over the years, and Thurfian was pretty sure the old man had disliked him. But Thraki had guided the myth well and with a firm hand, and the family had grown stronger and deeper under his leadership, and that truly was what mattered. Have you and the Patrials chosen his successor yet? He asked Theklo. We have, the speaker said. We've chosen you. Thurfian felt his mouth drop open, the last lingering tendrils of sleep fog vanishing. Me? You, Theklo confirmed. I know that traditionally the Patriarch is chosen from among the ranks of the Patrials, but the confusion surrounding the recent military incident has underscored the need to keep firm control of family dealings at the planetary level. None of them felt confident that they could leave matters in the hands of their deputies while new Patrials were chosen. What about you, ma'am? He asked. The speaker is also traditionally a viable candidate for patriarch. It is, Thyklo agreed, and the position was indeed offered to me. But the network of contacts and friendships I've established in the Syndicure can't simply be handed over to someone else, not even you. No offense meant. None taken, Thurfian said. So this was really happening. Patriarch of the myth, it was a huge step, but he could do it. He knew he could. The Patriarch had a whole squad of deputies and aides to help oversee the swirling hive that constituted the myth family. They would handle the details, leaving him free to consider and then enact the broader policy decisions. In fact, as he thought about it, he realized that Thyklo's position as speaker would actually have been harder for him to step into. That role was even more dependent on personal connections and relationships, on favors given and received, on quiet deals and unspoken promises. As Patriarch, Thurfian would have to take on some of those same tasks, of course. But now those challenges would be with his own family members and the other family patriarchs, not the roiling mess that was the Syndicure. Yes, he could do it. If you and the Patrials believe I can serve the family best in that capacity, he said gravely, I accept your offer with thanks and humility. I will strive, with your support and counsel, to maintain and advance the honor, glory, and power of the myth. As will we all, Thyklo said. And now you're expected at the homestead. Senior Aide Mythiviklo and an escort are on their way to your home, and should be there within 20 minutes. Bring whatever you like, but don't worry about packing. That will be handled later today. The office and staff will be informed while you're en route, and the Patrials will be waiting to speak to you via conference call when you arrive. Any questions? Not at this time, Thurfian said. Though as long as Senior Aide Thivik is still on his way, I might as well start the packing. I presume I'll be speaking with you later as well. At your convenience, Thyklo said. Congratulations, Patriarch Thurfian. May the myth flourish under your guidance. Patriarch Thurfian. The words echoed through Thurfian's mind as he pulled on his clothing. Patriarch Thurfian. He'd once wondered with private amusement what Zistalmu would think if he knew Thurfian had been elevated to Syndic Prime. He could only imagine the Arizi's expression when he learned Thurfian was now the myth patriarch. Zistalmu's expression would be priceless. So, when the time was right, would Thrawn's. Thurfian didn't have a lot of keepsakes, but most of them were items he didn't trust to some random moving crew. The 20 minutes were nearly up, and he'd finished packing the relics into sturdy travel boxes when there was a tone from the door. He opened it to find Senior Aide Thivik waiting, a group of 4 myth guards spread out protectively in the corridor behind him. Good evening, Senior Aide, Thurfian greeted him gravely, stepping aside to let him in. Thank you for coming, and my condolences on the passing of your master and our beloved patriarch. Thank you, Syndic Prime, Thivik said gravely as he stepped past Thurfian into the suite, closing the door on the other myth. Patriarch Thurfian, I should say? I trust you're ready? I am, Thurfian said, eyeing him closely. Thivik always looked old and gaunt, but tonight he looked even older. Patriarch Thraki's death had clearly hit him hard. I have a few things we'll want to take with us. Yes, Thivik said, turning to look at the boxes Thurfian had packed. You're quite pleased with yourself, aren't you? Pleased? Thurfian asked cautiously. Pleased that you've been granted the highest position in the myth family, Thivik said, still looking at the boxes. Thurfian countered. Yes, I'm pleased, humbled, and awestruck. Should one who has been placed at the head of the greatest and noblest family of the Chiss Ascendancy be otherwise? The greatest? Thivik said, his tone suddenly gone odd. Perhaps. That determination is for future historians. But the noblest? He turned around, and Thurfian had to stifle a sudden urge to take a step backward, the sudden intensity in the other's face. We shall travel to the homestead. Patriarch Thurfian, Thivik said quietly. We shall speak with the Patrials and your staff, and we shall settle you into your new home. You shall have a good night's rest and a filling breakfast. Thivik's eyes seemed to glitter. And then, he said, his voice taking on an edge of long-distant pain, I will tell you of the ancient history of the myth, the true history so long suppressed. And I will tell you of a terrible alien weapon known as Starflash.